The first time was a pair of discarded flip-flops by the back gate. A minor annoyance easily dismissed. I live in a quiet, secluded cul-de-sac, the kind of place where a misplaced shoe is a legitimate event. The second time, a wet towel lay crumpled by a lounge chair, still damp, smelling faintly of coconut and salt water. The third time, the scent was stronger. A distinct line of condensation marking a path from the pool's edge to the patio door, as if someone had stood there, dripping, for a long, quiet moment. The fourth time was a note, scrawled on the back of a receipt. "Sorry, I'm just borrowing a little piece." Borrowing. As if my pool was a library book, a public commodity for a private need, I'd tried everything. New locks on the back gate, fences. I'd even called the police, but they'd laughed, not unkindly, over the phone. "Son, trespassing on private property is a civil matter, and without a name or a face, there's not much we can do. She's not stealing anything, right? Just swimming? Just swimming." The words felt like a violation. It wasn't about the water or the electricity bill. It was about the intrusion. The quiet, unnerving knowledge that a stranger, a ghost with a taste for my chlorine-scented oasis, had been inside my personal space while I was away. It felt like a small psychological home invasion. My sanctuary was no longer mine alone. It had been contaminated by an unknown presence. My name is Julian, and my house is my castle. A two-story modern masterpiece of glass and steel, perched on a hill overlooking the city. A fortress of solitude. I designed it that way. Every line, every angle, every piece of furniture, and most importantly, the massive sapphire blue saltwater pool that dominates the back patio. It was my escape, my personal Eden. And she had sullied it. I spent the next 2 days in a fever. I canceled my lunch meetings, rescheduled a client call. I was possessed by the singular mission to catch her, to put a face to the ghost, to demand an explanation, to restore my sense of order. My fury wasn't a hot, blinding rage. It was a cold, calculating resolve. It was a plan. I drove to the nearest electronics store, a place a little too suburban for my usual tastes, and spent an hour talking to a tech-savvy teenager with an eyebrow piercing. I bought a set of wireless night vision security cameras with motion sensor capabilities. I bought a small, motion-activated sprinkler system meant for deterring raccoons from garbage cans. And I bought a weatherproof sealed container. Back at my house, I felt a kind of grim satisfaction. I was taking back control. I mounted one camera discreetly in the eaves of the house, angled to capture the entire pool and the back gate. I placed another on a low planter near the spa, hiding it beneath a cluster of lavender. I strung the sprinkler system's fine wires along the back fence line, concealing the emitters beneath the dense foliage. They were tiny, easily missed. The second she crossed the perimeter of the lawn, the spray would hit her like an icy shock. It wasn't meant to harm, just to startle. To scare her so badly she would never return. The last part of my plan was the most crucial. It wasn't a trap for her body, but for her conscience. I took the sealed container and a single sheet of paper. On it, in my sharpest, most legible handwriting, I wrote a single sentence. "I know you're here." I didn't sign it. I didn't threaten. I just let the words hang in the air, a silent, menacing promise. I placed the container at the edge of the diving board, a brazen, unmissable beacon. A challenge. I finished just as the sun was setting, a fiery orange stain on the horizon. The entire backyard, with its minimalist furniture and stark geometry, felt like a stage set, and I was the director waiting for my star to arrive. That night, I sat in the dark stillness of my study, the security monitor glowing like a single malevolent eye. I told myself I would watch just for a moment to make sure the cameras were working, but I couldn't look away. I saw the wind rustling the palm fronds, the leaves of a nearby oak tree dancing in the moonlight. I saw a gecko scurry across the deck, its tiny feet making no sound. The digital clock in the corner of the screen ticked past 10 o'clock, then 11. My eyes grew heavy. My resolve began to wane. Maybe tonight she wouldn't come. Maybe she had found a different pool. The motion sensor alert on my phone vibrated, a sudden sharp jolt that sent a spike of adrenaline through my chest. My breath caught in my throat. I sat up, leaning forward, my face inches from the screen. And there she was. She didn't come through the gate this time. She appeared from the side of the house, a shadow slipping around the corner. She moved with an unsettling grace, a feline fluidity that spoke of practice, of habit. She was slight, maybe in her early 20s with long dark hair tied up in a messy bun. She wore an old t-shirt and a pair of frayed shorts. She looked nothing like the phantom I had built up in my mind. The trespasser I had imagined was a brazen, reckless teenager, a wild spirit looking for a cheap thrill. The girl on my screen was quiet, hesitant. She moved like she was in a trance. She padded across the lawn, her bare feet silent on the cool grass. She stopped at the edge of the pool, the dark water reflecting the distant city lights. She didn't jump in. Not at first. She knelt down, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking slightly. My heart, which had been a drumbeat of righteous anger, now felt a strange, uncomfortable clench. What was happening? This wasn't the triumphant moment I'd envisioned, the moment I'd catch her, the moment she'd be exposed. This felt private. Then she raised her head. The night vision on the camera rendered her face in shades of gray and shadow, but I could make out the sharp lines of her cheekbones, the hollows beneath her eyes. And in her hands, she held something I hadn't seen before. A small, waterlogged book, its pages swollen and warped. She looked at it for a long, long moment, her expression unreadable. And then she held it out over the water, her fingers trembling. This was it. She was going to throw it in the pool. A final defiant act. A piece of her life she was casting off into my water. My hand was hovering over the remote to trigger the sprinklers, to end this surreal moment. But something made me pause. A flicker on the screen. A small, almost invisible detail. Her wrist. I zoomed in, adjusting the focus. It wasn't a watch. It was a thin, worn leather strap, and on it a tiny, tarnished silver locket. It looked old. And as she held the book over the water, she didn't look at it. She looked at the locket. The locket wasn't the detail. The detail was what was happening on the other side of the yard, just out of the main camera's view. My second camera, the one I'd hidden in the planter, had captured it a moment before she knelt down. She hadn't been looking at the pool. She had been staring at a rose bush I'd planted years ago in a quiet corner of the yard I rarely visited. A part of the lawn where a small, flat stone was almost completely overgrown with ivy. The note. She hadn't seen the note. She hadn't seen the cameras. She wasn't here to borrow my pool. She was here for something else, something hidden beneath the grass. My trap, the carefully constructed plan for retribution and control, was about to interrupt a moment so much more devastating than I could have ever imagined. The sprinklers would fire in 10 seconds, and she had no idea. My righteous anger, so absolute just a moment ago, crumbled. The locket, the rose bush, the waterlogged book, all of it came together in a flash of terrible clarity. She wasn't a trespasser. She was a pilgrim, and my pool was her destination. My trap was a weapon I was about to fire at a ghost who was already haunting her own grave. The timer on the sprinkler system counted down, 5, 4, 3, and the image on the screen, her kneeling form, became utterly, gut-wrenchingly clear. The hollows beneath her eyes were not just from sleeplessness. They were from grief. My finger hovered over the abort button. But before I could press it, a small boy. No. My finger poised over the abort button froze. The boy. He was a small, fragile echo of the girl, his face a perfect porcelain-white oval framed by a shock of dark hair. He stood beside her, his hand wrapped around her wrist, his eyes fixed on the small, flat stone half hidden by ivy. He couldn't be more than 6. He wasn't a shadow. He was a child. He was here, in my yard, in the dead of night, sharing a silent, private vigil with the girl I had so desperately and coldly sought to trap. The digital timer on the screen continued its silent, relentless countdown. 2, 1. The sprinklers were about to fire. An icy, high-pressure spray designed to terrify a phantom intruder, and they were about to hit a child. The thought was a physical blow to my stomach. I slammed my fist onto the table, searching for the physical kill switch for any way to stop it, but my hands were shaking too violently. The remote to my left, the one I had planned to use, felt a million miles away. 0. But nothing happened. The sprinklers remained silent. The garden lights remained dark. The only sound was the faint hum of the computer. My breath, which I hadn't realized I was holding, rushed out in a sharp exhale. I looked back at the remote. In my panic, I must have pressed the wrong button. The motion sensor was a dual system. One button to activate the spray, a second to arm the cameras. I had only armed the cameras. The wave of relief was so profound it left me weak. The cold, righteous anger that had propelled me for 2 days was gone, replaced by a scalding wave of shame. I had been so consumed by my sense of violation that I had become blind to the human element. The trespasser wasn't a reckless youth. The ghost in my yard wasn't an intruder. She was a mourner, and I had almost ambushed her at the most vulnerable moment of her grief. I grabbed the tablet and disarmed the cameras, the single beep a loud final note in the silent room. I couldn't watch this any longer. Not like this. I had to go out there. I had to face them, not as the angry homeowner, but as a man who had made a terrible mistake. I put on a pair of loafers and walked down the long, curving staircase, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence of my modern fortress. Every step felt like a new revelation of my own foolishness. The pristine glass walls seemed to mock me, reflecting a man I no longer recognized. When I reached the back patio, the cool night air hit me with the scent of damp earth and lavender. They were still there, kneeling beside the rose bush. The boy had placed his tiny book next to the girl's, a smaller, less swollen version of the same offering. The girl now held the small locket in her palm, her thumb tracing its tarnished silver face. They were a small, quiet island of sorrow in my sea of manicured perfection. I cleared my throat, the sound a jarring invasion. They both flinched. The boy jumped to his feet and darted behind the girl, peeking out from behind her legs. The girl stood slowly, her expression a mix of fear and defiance. Her eyes, when they met mine, were dark pools of exhaustion and pain. I'm Julian, I said, my voice feeling foreign and clumsy in the silence. This is my house. I know, she said, her voice soft but steady. There was no apology in it, no fear, just a simple statement of fact. My name is Lena. This is Leo. The boy, Leo, tightened his grip on her leg. I gestured awkwardly at the cameras I had just disarmed. I saw you. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. She didn't respond. She just watched me, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She had been caught. She was ready for the consequences. And in her silence, I felt the weight of my judgment, my anger, my cruel plan. It was a judgment I had cast on a situation I knew nothing about. I took a few steps closer, my hands out in a gesture of peace. The sprinklers were a bad idea. I've turned them off. I won't call the police. I just want to know why you're here. Lena looked down at the flat stone, then back at me. It was his pool. The words hung in the air, incomprehensible. Whose pool? I asked. She didn't answer right away. She walked past me toward the edge of the pool, toward the container I had left with my menacing note. She looked at it for a long moment, then at me. Her expression was unreadable. She walked to the lounge chair, picked up the wet towel she had left there a week ago, and laid it neatly on the armrest. Then she walked back and knelt down by the rosebush, picking up one of the waterlogged books. She held it out to me. This was his, she said. He loved to read, especially by the pool. He said the sound of the water helped him think. I took the book. The cover was a dark, sodden mess, the pages fused together into a single, pulpy block. It was a biography of a famous architect, a man whose work I had admired for years. A chill ran down my spine. The book and the stone, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What is this place to you? It's not your place, she said, her voice cracking for the first time. It's his. This was his house. Before it was yours, my mind reeled. The house, the architect, the biography. I had admired the work of the man who designed my house, but I had never looked into the history of the house itself. I had bought it through a series of anonymous transactions, a ghost-to-ghost transfer of ownership, a silent, seamless exchange. Who was he? I asked, my voice barely audible. My dad, she said. He designed this house. He built it. He died here. The air went out of my lungs. The beautiful, minimalist fortress I had purchased as my sanctuary was built by a man who had died within its walls, a man who loved to read by the pool, a man who had a daughter named Lena and a son named Leo. The note I had so callously left, I know you're here, was a testament to my ignorance. She wasn't a trespasser. She was a daughter, returning to the place of her father's passing, bringing her own son to a sacred, tragic sight. The flip-flops, the wet towel, the note, they weren't about violation. They were about memory. Leo, who had been hiding behind his sister, now stepped forward, his small hand holding the book he had brought. He looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "He said we should always bring a new book," Leo said, his voice a tiny, high-pitched whisper, "and throw it in the water. So he'd have something to read in heaven." The words hit me with the force of a tidal wave. The waterlogged books weren't an act of defiance or rebellion. They were a ritual. A child's desperate, heartbreaking attempt to keep his father alive. And I had been so busy protecting my property, I had almost destroyed his ritual. I looked at the pool, the dark, mirrored surface now a monument to my own self-absorption. This wasn't a place of escape anymore. It was a place of tragedy, a silent crypt for a man I had admired, and a shrine for a family I had wronged. I sank to the ground, the cold, smooth concrete a sharp contrast to the burning shame that coursed through me. I didn't have words. Only the image of a child's hand holding a tiny waterlogged book, offering a story to a father who was no longer there. The trap was gone, but I was now the one truly caught, ensnared by a truth so much more powerful, so much more devastating than I could have ever imagined. I looked at Lena, at the raw, vulnerable pain etched on her face. "I'm so sorry," I said, the words feeling pitifully small and meaningless. Her gaze, which had been so full of grief, now shifted to something new. Something I couldn't place. It was a flicker of recognition, a glimmer of a memory I didn't share. She wasn't just here for her father. She was here because of me. A final, horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "You don't just own this house," she said, her voice now hard and clear as glass. "You own the company that built the chemical plant that made my father sick." The words hung in the air, a final lethal blow. "You own the company that built the chemical plant that made my father sick." The quiet of the night, the peaceful hum of the pool's filtration system, the very air itself felt thick and suddenly toxic. My mind, which had just been grappling with a simple trespass, was now trying to process a catastrophic charge. I stumbled back, my hand instinctively reaching for the cool concrete to steady myself. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say, the words a hollow parody of a question. "My company? It's an architectural firm. We design commercial spaces. We don't build chemical plants." Lena's face, a mask of exhausted grief moments before, hardened into a cold, unwavering fury. Her dark eyes, which had held the raw vulnerability of a daughter, now glinted with the fierce conviction of an accuser. She took a step toward me, and Leo, still clinging to her leg, flinched back. "Not your firm now," she said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. "Your father's company, Intercorp, the one you inherited. He bought out the holding company that owned the plant. He bought it for pennies on the dollar after they went bankrupt in the settlement. He buried the liability, buried the records, buried the families. My blood ran cold. Intercorp. The name was a phantom from my childhood. I had been a kid when my father, a ruthless and brilliant businessman, had made that deal. A whisper of a scandal, a few headlines in a newspaper I never read, then silence. He had sold off the assets, rebranded the company, and folded the profits into what would become the very foundation of my legacy. The name Intercorp had been deliberately scrubbed from the history of my firm, a forgotten, sordid chapter of my father's empire building. I had never bothered to ask why. I had simply inherited. That was years ago, I stammered, my carefully constructed world of clean lines and ethical design crumbling at my feet. I had nothing to do with that. But you benefited from it. She spat, her voice rising with each word. The money from that deal, the land they poisoned, the lives they destroyed, that's what paid for this. For this pool! For this house built by my father, who you killed. Leo started to whimper, tugging on her shorts. Lena. She ignored him, her focus a searing beam on me. Do you know how he died? He didn't just get sick. He got worse. The doctor said it was an aggressive form of lung disease. From the fumes. He had worked on the site as a consultant. He went back and forth, he trusted them. They told him it was all safe. And then, the lawsuits. My mom, a waitress up against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They bled us dry, Julian. The hospital bills, the lawyers. We lost everything. She gestured around the vast, pristine backyard. Every time I came here, I felt it. The irony. He built something beautiful, a monument to his art, and the man who profited from his death now owns it. He swims in the water he loved in a house built by his hands, and you didn't even know his name. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had been so convinced of my own rectitude, the man of clean, modern design, the man who had a note on his desk about the importance of ethical sourcing. It was all a lie. A beautiful, polished, hollow lie built on a foundation of rot and death. I didn't know, I whispered, the words a desperate plea. I swear to you I didn't know. My father, he never spoke of it. The firm was just an old firm he sold me. He said I was starting with a clean slate. A clean slate? Lena's laugh was a bitter, broken sound. There is no clean slate, Julian. The stain is on every brick of this house, on every molecule of that pool. You can scrub all you want, but you can't wash away a man's life. She looked down at the flat stone again, and for the first time, I noticed what was etched on it. The name Jonathan and a date. The date was less than a year after I had taken over the firm. Less than a year after my father had signed the papers, turning over his toxic assets in exchange for the capital that built my empire. Leo, his whimpering now a soft sob, pulled her arm. Lena, I'm scared. She knelt down, wrapping her arms around him, pulling his small head into her chest. The silent, mournful vigil was over, replaced by the raw, shattering sound of a child's pain. My anger, my frustration, my self-pity, all of it was insignificant. I had been worried about a pair of flip-flops. She had lost her father. I knelt down on the cold concrete a few feet away, my own hands trembling. Lena, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What do you want? I'll do anything. I'll give you this house. I'll give you whatever you need. She looked at me over Leo's shoulder, her eyes still filled with fire, but something else now, a flicker of calculation. Money? This isn't about money. You think a check can fix what you did? She stood up, pulling Leo with her. He buried his face in her side, his small body shaking. She looked at the sprawling house behind me, its glass walls gleaming in the moonlight, then back at me. I don't want your house, she said. I want to finish what my father started. Her words were a riddle, a new challenge. I was ready to offer anything, but I had no idea what she was asking for. Was it an emotional demand? A promise of exposure? A bizarre form of poetic justice? She walked to the edge of the pool, her bare feet silent on the patio, and looked down at the inky black water. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She pointed to the container I had left with my note, the note that now felt like the cruelest joke I could have ever played. I want the blueprints, she said, her voice now dangerously calm. Not for this house, but for the plant. The real ones, the ones your father hid. I want to show the world what they did to him, and to everyone else. I stared at her, then back at the container, my mind racing. Blueprints? I had no idea if they even existed. My father had been a master of obscuring his tracks. The company was gone. The records were gone. And yet she was asking for the one thing that could truly prove his guilt and her story. It was an impossible request. A trap of her own, a final crushing piece of karmic justice. And if you won't help me, she asked, her eyes meeting mine, cold and unforgiving, then every person who gets sick from that land, every child who cries for a parent they lost, they will be your fault too. Just like my... The air was thick with the weight of her words. Then every person who gets sick from that land, every child who cries for a parent they lost, they will be your fault too, just like my dad. The accusation was a brand, a permanent mark seared into my soul. I was no longer the innocent bystander, the unwitting heir. I was a direct line of consequence, the inheritor of a legacy built on a man's death. I knelt there on the cold concrete, my world shrinking to the tiny, shivering form of Leo and the fierce, unyielding gaze of his sister. My carefully curated life, my fortress of solitude, felt like a flimsy theatrical set, and she had just pulled back the curtain to reveal the rotten, blood-stained stage beneath. Lena, I said, my voice a broken whisper. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Ignorance is not an excuse, she shot back, her voice a low growl. You were born into the privilege that bought this house and killed my dad. That's not a mistake you make. It's a debt you owe, and you can't pay it off with an apology. I know, I said, the words heavy with a truth I had just discovered. I know. I looked up at her, really seeing her for the first time. The exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was a deep, bone-weary fatigue, born from years of fighting a system designed to crush her. Tell me what you need. A name, a location. What do the blueprints look like? My father. He was meticulous. He never left a loose end. He left us, she said, her voice catching. He left us with nothing, and now he's left you with this. He hid them because he was afraid. He knew what he had done. He was a good man, Julian, but he was scared. She pulled Leo closer, stroking his hair. The boy's sobs had subsided into silent, shuddering breaths. She looked at me, her face softening just a fraction. My dad kept everything, every draft, every schematic. I remember him talking about a set of blueprints, the real ones, the ones that showed the shortcuts, the ones that proved they cut corners on the ventilation, the waste disposal, everything. He said he was going to expose them, but he got sick. And then he was gone. The weight of her words settled on me. I don't know where they are. He sold the company, erased every trace. The only records I've ever seen were the sanitized versions. Then you find them, she said, her voice now dangerously calm. This house was his last masterpiece, the only place he felt safe. Maybe he hid them here. Maybe he left a clue. He was an architect, Julian. He thought in blueprints. He thought in secrets. I stood up, my legs still shaky. I'll try, I said, the promise a new kind of vow. I'll do everything I can. Lena's face remained a blank mask of distrust. She didn't believe me, and I couldn't blame her. I'm leaving, she said, pulling Leo toward the gate. But I'll be back. I want to know what you find. I'll be watching. The threat was a promise. I watched them walk away, a small solitary pair disappearing into the shadows. The backyard, which had just moments ago been the stage for a dramatic confrontation, now felt vast and empty. The only sound was the gentle sloshing of the water in the pool. I walked to the edge and looked at the dark water, the same water I had so jealously guarded. It was no longer a place of serenity. It was a mirror, reflecting a man I didn't know. A man who had benefited from a tragedy he was only now beginning to understand. I went back inside. The house feeling less like a fortress and more like a mausoleum. I walked through the silent rooms, each one a testament to my father's cold, calculated genius and my own blithe ignorance. The gleaming surfaces, the minimalist furniture, the perfect symmetry. It was all a facade. My search began in his old study. I had kept it exactly as he had left it, a tribute to the man who had built my life. The walls were lined with books on architecture and business. The desk was a massive slab of mahogany, a monument to power. I started with the obvious places. The filing cabinets, the drawers, the hidden compartments I had found over the years. Nothing. All the files were sterile, professional, and devoid of any human element. He had been so good at this. He had been a master of hiding. I spent hours poring over every book, every document, every loose paper. Nothing. It was all a dead end. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. She had given me a mission, but it was impossible. He had left no trace. I was back to where I started, helpless and culpable. I was the fool who had almost set a trap for a grieving child. And now I was a fool who was hunting for a ghost of a paper trail, trying to right a wrong I had no part in making. My eyes fell on a large, ornate portrait of my father that hung over the fireplace. It was an oil painting, commissioned a few years before he died. He was seated in a high-backed leather chair, his face a mask of stern calculation. I had always hated the painting. It was too formal, too cold. I felt a pang of resentment toward the man in the portrait, the man who had created this beautiful lie and left me to deal with the consequences. I walked closer, my hands in my pockets, and for the first time, I noticed a detail I had overlooked for years. The artist had signed the painting in the bottom right corner, a small, almost invisible signature. But next to it, tucked into a fold of the canvas, was a tiny, perfect red-painted dot. My father had a strange habit. When he wanted to remind himself of something, he would draw a small red dot on the back of his hand with a fine-tipped pen. It was a mnemonic, a silent reminder. I had forgotten about it until now. The dot on the canvas wasn't the artist's work. It was my father's. I reached up, my fingers brushing the smooth canvas, and felt a small, almost imperceptible protrusion. It was a thumb drive, tiny and sleek, taped to the back of the frame, right above the red dot. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled the frame off the wall, a cloud of dust puffing out from behind it. I carefully peeled the thumb drive from the canvas and held it in my hand. It was a physical object, a tangible piece of my father's hidden world. I walked to my desk, my hands shaking with anticipation, and plugged the drive into my laptop. The folder that popped up on the screen wasn't labeled with a name or a number. It was just a series of dates. I clicked on the earliest date, and a single cryptic file appeared. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a digital map. A satellite view of a small, forgotten town in the middle of nowhere. A town I had never heard of in a state I had never visited. And at the center of the map, a single pulsating red icon.